Hey everyone, this time on Tim Talks Audio, we continue our stock plugin series, this time going over groove delay. I've already released a video going over analog delay, which is your very standard delay unit built into Studio One. Today we're getting into groove delay, which is a much more advanced and time-based tap delay that you can use inside your productions. So let's dive into the DAW, take a look at all of the controls, and dissect groove delay. So here we go. Here is groove delay. It is a 4-tap delay unit built into Studio One. And what does that mean? Well, you can take the 4 taps, which are delay hits, and change them so that they're not always happening locked to the grid or using just milliseconds to kind of offset maybe a little bit off from the grid or getting it really close. What you can do with this is lock in different delay hits at different times. So maybe you do want a quarter note delay, but you also want this kind of upbeat delay on every third. With a tap delay, you could do something like that. So let's go over all of the controls and the display of groove delay. Up on top is the grid view, and you can change what you're looking at with the grid display up here with the buttons on the top right. Right now we're looking at level, so it's basically the intensity of that tap of the delay. And you can see the taps are all color-coded and the controls underneath match those same colors. So red, tap 1, green, tap 2, so on and so forth. But going back to the grid display, right now we're looking at level, but these other buttons on the top right change the display to what you want it to view. Maybe you want to see the swing value. Now you can come into here and actually click and drag your swing values. And right now, 2 and 4 and 1 and 3 are linked together, and we'll get into that in a bit. Next to that is cutoff, and it does exactly like it says. It adjusts the cutoff resonance of the filters within these taps. And we'll get into that in a second. It's actually hidden under the filter controls. You can see it down here. So if I grab red and adjust, you can see my cutoff is being affected here. And I don't need to have filter control open. This is adjusting that cutoff frequency. And the last view we can go to is the LFO. Once again, I'm going to open up filter controls and we'll adjust blue, which already has some LFO added into it. And I can adjust the LFO amount for my blue tap, tap number 3, within the display up on top. And you can see it is also correlating down on bottom. I'll put everything back to default and we'll continue on. Now let's go over to the left of the grid display, and that is the note value. This changes the values that we are looking at in the grid display. By default, it comes up as eighth notes, but of course you can go all the way up to half notes or all the way down to 64th notes. So right now in the default eighth notes, what we're looking at is right on the blue line here. It's basically the divider between the note selection and the grid view. This is beat 1. So here's our first eighth note, the end of 1. If we continue on, 2 and 3 and 4, and the next measure starts right here, and you can tell because it's a brighter line. It sticks out just a little bit more. So this is beat 1 of the next measure. If we were going to go to 16th notes, we just have more steps in between all of our measures. Then on bottom, you have your 4 different tap adjustments, and they're sectioned out so you're only affecting just that tap, that delay hit that you're going to hear. All of the controls are the same between the 4 taps, but this allows you to offset them and just have different hits within your tap delay. So if we go over the controls on tap 1, it's the same thing for tap 2, tap 3, and tap 4. So let's start on top and we'll go over position. This is where this tap is within our selected grid. So we're on position 1, which is the first eighth note, because that is our grid right here. So we're on the first eighth note. This is when the first delay hit will happen. And I can easily just click and drag this up. And because we're in straight time, as we can see to the right of our position, we're on step 5 of our eighth notes on straight time. So on step 5, dead on, this is when this tap will hit. And depending on the scale you're working on, this number will adjust. Right now, it's only going up to 16 because we're looking at 2 bars in eighth notes. If we change this up to 64th notes, you can see the number gets much higher, and we can go all the way up to beat 64. We're still within our 2 measures, but where the tap is in all of those 64th notes is dictated by the position. Underneath that is the horizontal bar, and this is your tap groove slider. It allows you to actually offset our straight time for your tap to either something dotted or trilodic, more of like a triplet kind of feel, a little rushed. So all you have to do with this is click and drag, and now watch the red tap. It will push ahead of our first eighth note, and that's because we're pushing into it being the first hit of a triplet. Or we can go in the opposite direction, and as you can see with the green tap, it is set to dotted, so it is behind the second eighth note within our grid. Underneath that is your feedback control, and this is on a per tap basis. If you want tap 3 to have more feedback because it's offset and it gives this really cool groove, you can drive more feedback of tap 3, but not of your other taps. Up next is level, and this is just the level or the loudness of this delay, and that's going to be working in conjunction with your mix knob. If you're using this straight on the track like I am here, I'm going to use the mix knob to get my blend of my dry signal and my wet signal. And then I can use the levels to maybe increase one hit a little bit more or bring one down and really kind of offset these delays. It's not just going to be a standard kind of sound like the analog delay would give us. We can have tap 2 be louder than tap 1, and that works the opposite way that a delay would. And then the last control is pan. Right now I'm just on a mono track, but we'll put this onto a stereo guitar bus in a little bit, and you can actually take these taps and throw them out into the stereo field. To the right are your global settings, and so that is the global feedback amount of your different delays, how many times they're feeding back in and giving you more or less repeats, and just your overall mix knob. If you're using this on a track, use this to get your wet-dry blend. If you're using on a bus or an effects track, you'll most likely put this to 100% so that it's just the affected sound and no dry signal in. You would just adjust your blend with your send to that effects channel or bus. Now, we teased it before, but that's not all the controls. Once you open up filter controls, you get the next section. And again, this is the same where with your different taps, the controls are the same. They're just dedicated to whichever tap you are working on. So once again, starting at the top of our filter section is the filter button itself. This actually is a button. So if I wanted to bypass the filter section on my first tap, but have it engaged on my second, I could just click on filter and it turns it off. If it's not illuminated, it is in bypass. And if it is illuminated to the tap color, it is affecting the sound of the tap. Underneath the filter bypass button is your XY pad. And if you haven't worked with XY pads before, they're pretty easy, and thankfully this one shows you what it's doing. So there's a dot in your XY pad that you can click and drag around, or if you have a MIDI controller, you can map it to move it around with your MIDI controller. Wherever the red dot is in this XY pad is the sound of the filter. So in the dead center, there's essentially not a lot of filtering going on, if any, maybe about 50%, because we have it hovering right here. And if we look at the pop-up, everything's about 50%. So it's a little bit of low pass, a little bit of high pass, a little bit of band pass, cutting the highs and the lows, or more of a peak filter where it's pushing something up in the mid-range. As we move the dot around, we will get different sounds, and you can automate this to get different kinds of filter sweeps going through your taps. Pushing all the way to the right is more of a high pass. Pushing all the way to the left is a low pass. Pushing up is a band pass, and pushing down is more of a peak resonant filter. Underneath the XY pad is the cutoff and resonance controls of those filters. So you can roll off some lows in your filter section here, or as we saw before in your grid display, and adjust the resonance of those filters as well. The next horizontal slider on bottom is your cutoff. So this control here, LFO amount. So right now we have it set to 212 Hertz on our first tap. And if we were just going to add in some LFO, it will shift the cutoff frequency just a little bit, or a lot if we turn this way up, so that that filter sound has some movement. It changes and hovers around that 212 Hertz center frequency. Then all the way on the right is another global section control. This is the cutoff LFO speed. So it's the speed of the LFO for each of the taps. It's the same speed, it's global, so it's affecting all of them. And it's for the LFO amount of those filters. If you don't have the filter active, it's not going to impart any sound. But if you do have the filters active and you're adding some of that LFO filter to your cutoff, this is the speed that that movement of that cutoff frequency is set to. You can have it sync to your session as you would with any other delay and get all of your beat values, or you can turn it into Hertz values and adjust that way. So there you go. That's all of the controls for groove delay. And it's a lot of controls. Let's set this back to default. And we have our filter controls open, and let's take a listen to what this is actually doing. I'm gonna bypass it real quick so you can hear the guitar we're going to affect. And like I said before, this is a mono guitar. There's our before. Now let's take it out of bypass and just the default settings. So let me do something for you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the levels of taps 3 and 4 out, and I want you to listen to tap 1, which is set to an eighth note, and tap 2, which is set to a dotted eighth note on the second beat. So this is where you can actually set in some groove in your delays. I'll even take off the filters and we can listen to it like this. So now we've offset the volume of our delays. We brought tap 1 down and tap 2 is louder and offset from the grid. It's doing what a delay shouldn't do. A standard delay has the signal and then the signal a little bit lower and the signal a little bit lower and the signal a little bit lower. This allows us to change that, where we can have the first repeat low, the second repeat loud, the third repeat even louder, and maybe you have your delays actually going up in volume. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn the feedback way up, and we'll mess around with the filter section. And I'm just going to do tap 1. I'll put everything to kind of normal, and we'll get more feedback so we can hear these delays, and we'll just sweep around with our XY pad by clicking and dragging the mouse. At the end there, we had the feedbacks very high, so it started to resonate on itself, and you can do that with a delay. There was an example. But we messed with the cutoff. We didn't really mess with the resonance or the LFO, so let's go ahead and just add some of that in and take a listen to some sounds. So you heard the LFO affecting those cutoff frequencies on our delays and giving us almost like a wah sound. It had that same kind of filtery sound because we're locked into the grid of this song. So it's almost like a wah, but not quite. So I was very quickly going through a couple of the presets, and just listen to this, shuffled reso. It's shuffling our beat, or it's giving us more of a shuffled beat, and it's applying a bunch of resonance to the filters. Take a listen. And then here's another preset called Swinging Eighths that I made slight changes to by just increasing the levels of taps 1 and 3. But it's swinging our eighth note, so we get kind of a gallop into our delays, which is really cool. So I've taken groove delay and I've put it onto a stereo guitar bus that I very quickly made. Now we can go in and actually take the same guitar that we were listening to, sent into the bus, and push those delays out to the sides because we're using a stereo bus. And now our pan controls are active, as you can see here. So we can take all of our different delay hits and push them further out in the stereo field, but still have that guitar straight up the center. So there we go. Now we have our delays pushed out to the side and we have a little bit of swing going on with them. The groove is built in. We're just using the default settings, but we're pushing the pans out so that the different hits spread out into the stereo field. It started with the mix knob at 100%, but you saw as we played, we brought that down, blended it in so that our guitar was right up the center, but then the delays were pushed out to the sides, making room for the next line in this part. So there it is, that's groove delay. What are some cool things that you have used a tap delay on? And if you haven't used a tap delay before, maybe this is exactly the thing you were looking for to get some offset delays in your productions. That's all for now. If you found anything informative, please like and share the video. For more, visit timflansbaum.com, and if you have a question, ask it in the comments and I'll answer it in a future video. Thanks for watching.